He's definitely brutal. He's always savage, and you're definitely getting wrecked.
One thing that I noticed a lot of the Western fans missed was that because you guys were actually doing Overwatch before you left League of Legends, where you were simultaneously doing Apex, the first seasons, and you were doing the LCK stuff, it's not like it just went from League of Legends and then it came hard to Overwatch League and there was nothing in between. There was like a whole year in between, basically, where you did these tournaments that were, funnily enough, it was like winding the clock back. You were doing the OG, it may as well have been OGN Champions again. It was a tournament format. You see all the teams, you get to know the plot, right? In this kind of a setup, was it always the case that even before you knew Overwatch League, like what the details were, and I don't know when you guys were hired in the process, but were you already planning on making Overwatch like one of your games anyway?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we were planning on making Overwatch our since the trailer was released at BlizzCon. Like that day we talked about it. I remember being up at like 4 or 5 a.m. in Korea to watch this stuff live, watch the BlizzCon opening ceremony live where they announced this. And so from that day on, we were planning to make Overwatch our game, our number one game. But, we realized there would be a transition, like you mentioned, with that. What was the other part of the question? I totally asked. I totally forgot.
I mean, well, like, for example, if there hadn't have been an Overwatch League, would you have tried to just do like both simultaneously? Would you maybe even have just transitioned completely over to the Apex side?
I don't know. I think we put it in our contracts for the next year that if there was an Overwatch tournament that OGN did, we would be the casters for it. So we put the groundwork right there to make sure we had the opportunity to. But if there wouldn't have been an Overwatch League, I would imagine we would just be doing both. We'd just be doing Apex and League of Legends, and probably more Apex and less League of Legends at the time, because we were kind of planning on moving more towards Overwatch and away from League, but I don't know if we would have given up League completely. It's all hypotheticals, but I think we would have been happy doing both, kind of like what we were doing at the time. But we were hired by the Overwatch League officially in November of 2016. So that was a long time before the Overwatch League really began, So we were kind of there from the very early planning phases, and we also heard that they were doing the league a long time before a lot of other people did, because we made it clear to Blizzard early on too. We knew people at Blizzard obviously from the other games we were involved in. I was still doing Hearthstone at the time, and so we made it clear to Blizzard that we wanted to do Overwatch and that we wanted to be heavily involved with that game. So when the idea of the league came up, I'm pretty sure that we were some of the first people they came to with that. And I know Monty and I were the first hires at the Overwatch League. There was a time where it was just Monty and I and Nate Nanzer and Marissa at Blizzard, who's awesome and still involved in the league. And there was a time when 2016 I was at a Hearthstone event in LA, and Nate Nanzer came to the hotel lobby and with his laptop, and we sat down in the lobby, and he's like, "Look, this is the Overwatch League," and he showed me a PowerPoint of the idea for the league. We're gonna have city-based teams, we're gonna have all this kind of stuff, and he's like, "Are you interested in this?" And I was like, "Yes, this looks amazing. Let's do it." So it's something we always planned on doing is moving into Overwatch, and it's been really cool to see it go from like a PowerPoint to where we're at now.
One thing I always thought was pretty funny, and I can kind of tell you were in a similar boat, is, so me and you have obviously watched StarCraft long before there even was a League of Legends, basically. And so I remember coming into League of Legends, and around the time I came into League of Legends was when there was a discussion in the Western community of like, will Koreans be better than us? And if you remember, hilariously, a whole bunch of the Western pros were saying what now are some of the most immortal fat last words ever. Like, I think it was Doublelift had the line that was, or maybe Chowster, where it was like, they'll always be 2 years behind or something hilarious. And obviously the idea is, if you come from StarCraft, you're like, listen, boys, give them a chance. These guys end up being pretty good. But the big joke is, though, when Overwatch started, we had to do the same thing again. There was all these teams, the envious guys, the fans in the West, and they were like, listen, okay, I'll grant you, maybe a few of them are good at the support role, but will they ever have the great DPS players? That, there was this weird discussion. Yes, aim. Exactly. So what did you think of this aspect? Because I feel like you must have been thinking, I've seen this show before.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Koreans at the time just worked harder than everybody else. They just played more. They played the game for more hours. And they were very structured about their practice, and they took everything very, very seriously, and they had serious coaches and VOD reviews and all that. So it's only a matter of time when you compare that work ethic to what existed in North America and Europe, of course the Koreans are going to be better. And so it was ludicrous to think it would be anything different. So it was fun to be in that position to kind of be like, just wait and see. You'll see how good these guys are going to be. Especially the Overwatch one just killed me. Like the whole Koreans can't aim.
That was a good one, yeah.
Koreans can't aim because they only play RTSs and MOBAs. Like they don't play FPSs. And I'm like, no, they play FPSs you don't know about because you don't live in Asia. Like there's a sudden attack, point blank. There's
Crossfire.
Crossfire, all these like Counter-Strike ripoffs, essentially. Some of them even use like the same sound files.
Sure.
Counter-Strike is hilarious. But yeah, Koreans have been playing FPSs just as much as anyone else has, They've just been playing different FPSs. So the idea that like Koreans couldn't aim was just like laughable. But so many people bought into that, right? Where they're like, oh, I don't know if the Koreans are going to be good at Overwatch. And Monty and I are just like, well, it's kind of inevitable, guys. It's just how the world works, At the time, the sun rises in the east and Koreans will be better than you at esports.
Indeed. Okay, so when you said there that you actually were hired around late 2016, so this is actually even the same year when all the things were going on with Riot, with the MSI standout thing. Obviously, Monty had his whole scenario with Renegades at a similar time period, all kind of coalesced around the same time, right? I've heard from Monty when he told me some of the information about when he got this deal and what it represented and some of the details, as you alluded to in the contract, like, you had it set out already that you had access to other events potentially if there ended up being a circuit, because people initially thought there was going to be sort of like a Overwatch League, and then in the break that you had between it, maybe there'd be third-party tournaments or something, right? I've always said this to people who bring up that point where they're sort of like, they try to make it sound like Monty was run out of League of Legends and now, they wouldn't even have him back if he wanted to. And I always used to tell people, I'll just go ahead and tell you, based on my knowledge of the casting industry, Monty has the best contract in the entire world in casting right now, and it's not even close. Like the amount, the freedom it still grants, like extra details of like things you get to have a say in potentially. This is crazy compared to, as we alluded to before, at one point in time, maybe Riot was even behind the times in terms of the industry. So was it a scenario that it was like, you already liked the game, as you alluded to, but the deal sounds almost too good to be true. It sounds amazing.
The deal was very good. It was a good deal. Yeah. And we had had a conversation before in Korea because we both really loved living in Korea and loved doing esports in Korea. And so we had discussions because we knew, that things were going to come up in North America over time. It was only a matter of time before the US caught on to this esports thing and started taking it seriously. And so we're like, well, when the time comes and people start asking us to leave Korea, what's our limit? What are we going to, leave for? Right. And so, that happened. And I think we got a really good deal with the Overwatch League, and I think that's something that too we're trying to like bring other people up to that level as well, and get everyone on board and elevate the industry in general, right? Because it's not good if it's only us, right? It's good if all the top casters have good deals and are making a good living, right? We want casting to be a career that some kid in grade school wants to do, and then can grow up in a world where there's an industry where if he's good enough, he or she is good enough, they can do that someday and make a good living,
Since you alluded earlier to the fact that when you first got to Korea and you were grinding and working your way through esports, obviously at times you'd be broke, basically. You'd be making very, very little. As you said, you never know when a company's going to have liquidity issues and can't pay you that month. I know myself coming up in esports, I used to tell people, they think I'm joking, I was serious. If I ever made $1 from a job, I would never spend that dollar until it was in my account, because sometimes, especially in the old days, it just never turns up. So if you'd have spent it then, and that would need to be your rent, well, guess what? The landlord doesn't give a fuck that this company is a great esports company and they just need an extra month. He doesn't care. He needs that rent money. So when you get a big deal like this and you get to come back to America, even your home country, this has to be kind of a cool feel, right? A cool moment to have in esports.
It is, yeah. It does feel like a lot of the years and some of that hardship, did kind of pay off in the end. And it does feel good, of course, when something you've worked really, really hard on for a lot of years finally, pays off to a certain extent. And we're not like multimillionaires or anything like that. We're not like fabulously wealthy. I don't have a Lamborghini in downstairs in my apartment building garage, right? But yeah, we're definitely comfortable. And from where I was at, in pretty rural Minnesota, not rural, but like 50,000 people is a pretty small town, to now it's such a big difference. And there was a time in Korea where I had like literally $0 because I was working for GOM TV at the time, and I was making about approximately like $120 in equivalent Korean money per broadcast, but I would only do maybe like 1 a week or 2 a week. And so there, you're really struggling financially there. And there was a time where I would like wait for people to make rice in the rice cooker at the GOM house where I was living with a bunch of pros. And then I would eat the leftover rice with soy sauce, and that would be like my lunch. And I would just tell everybody I really liked how it tasted. But I couldn't.
So you want no big guy you are, DoA. You even spun that as a great meal.
It was like, oh man, I just love rice. Soy sauce, so tasty and fulfilling. But then I would steal change from the change jar to go and buy kimbap, which is this little rice, seaweed rice wrap.
It's pretty much the cheapest food you could buy, right?
Yeah. There was a point in time where I had a jar of peanut butter, and my meals would be leftover rice with soy sauce, kimbap when I would have the change, and then I would have a spoonful of peanut butter for protein. And then I would go and cast. And it, obviously it was tough from a financial perspective, but we were having so much fun that like it didn't even feel as hard as it sounds. Like that sounds like an awful situation, right, to be in. And objectively, from a dollars and cents situation, it was an awful situation to be in. But I was having so much fun, like hanging out with those guys in Korea and casting StarCraft, that like it was hard to care. I was having the time of my life, so I didn't really mind too much. There was other stuff going on in life that made things tough, but as far as the job situation goes, everything was good there.
Sure. Right. Since for the Overwatch League, it did involve, especially obviously the entire first season was in LA. It was just in the studios there. You had to move back. Like, listen, I don't know how much he's ever said publicly, but put it this way, I'll just tell everyone now, Monty's not a huge fan of moving to LA. He's the sort of guy who simultaneously will tell me I need to move to LA, and then in the next sentence says, by the way, it's terrible though. It's like, what you're sending mixed messages here, mate. But here's the thing, DoA. Even though, yes, I understand you have a great affection for movies and nerd culture and stuff, at the same time, you don't really strike me as an LAist kind of person. So how have you found it? Did it meet the expectations? Was it different? Have you found something cool about it?
I don't know if anyone really lives in LA because they love LA. I mean, I think, well, people who are born and raised in LA, like true Angelinos, like really love it here. And I can see why, but I think part of really enjoying LA is being apart from the entertainment industry. The people in the entertainment industry are not genuine oftentimes. And a lot of times when you meet someone new in this industry in LA, it's like, you can tell that they're during the introductions are kind of like gauging is like, is this person going to be useful to me? Are they worth knowing? And like, as someone like me from the Midwest, where we tend to be very frank and open, and there's no ambiguity about like, if we don't want to meet someone, we don't meet someone because we wonder if we can use them or not, right?
Sure.
I'm out there like to try to meet cool people that I find are interesting to talk to and make friends with and stuff like that. And so it gets tiring going to some of like these parties and stuff and having everyone like meet you and be like, oh, what do you do? Oh, it's like an interview, and like a way less fun interview than this one, I'll say. It's like a totally different kind of interview.
Sure.
I'm sure there's a better word to use than that, but yeah. So
it reminds me of those like networking parties. I even hate that term because it's obviously coming to esports now. Because it's the same thing, isn't it? It's one thing if you just say, let's meet this group of people, and if some of them happen to be people I might want to do business with, great. But if the person meets you and it's kind of like they're either going to talk to you for 2 seconds if they think you're boring, or take you to one side and rip your ear off about their job for half an hour if they think they could work with you. Neither's a great option. You're sort of looking past that person for the normal people in the room.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, I've met some people in LA. There's a clothing brand called Alt that makes a lot of clothing stuff for Overwatch League and for other esports, and just for their own clothing line too. Like they have their stuff in Zoomies stores and all that. But I had met one of the co-founders and the designer for their clothes, one of the lead designers, and he's an awesome guy. And he and I are working on a collaboration right now. We have a partnership that there's some stuff is coming out very soon that I'm very excited about. So, and that came from that kind of thing too. So it's not all bad. You do occasionally meet really cool people, but a lot of it is just kind of like slogging your way through like this swamp of people who just want to further their own career, by seeing if you're going to be helpful to that. So I don't like that. But at the same time, I totally get why Monty would say that he hates LA, but wants you to move here as well, because I don't particularly enjoy living in Los Angeles either, but you can't deny that the opportunities are great. Like there's so many people that are interested in what you're interested in. And there's a lot of people that are very motivated to make content. And it's really cool. It is cool being around that crowd, right? A crowd that wants to make a lot of entertaining content, things like that. That's really fun. So that part of LA I really like. And that's something I wouldn't have in Seoul. So it makes it tough to move back, because it would be tougher to do some of the cool stuff that I've been able to do living here if I moved back. So it is very much like a kind of love-hate thing with LA. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm definitely more comfortable in Seoul, just living there, just for my life and stuff like that. But, I'm happy to be in LA, I guess, for the opportunities it provides. And I live in a quieter part of town, so that's kind of nice too. I have a place to kind of retreat. So yeah, it's a seesaw of feelings towards the city. That's for sure. It's an interesting city, though. No doubt about that.
Sure. Right, what about in the whole game of Overwatch itself? Because I noticed one of the things that obviously everyone pointed out in the early days was it's not as simple a game to spectate, and as a result to cast as well and to observe, and all the aspects of doing the esports broadcast. So obviously you're someone who has a background. You've done play-by-play. You've been the analyst guy for StarCraft. How have you found the experience of actually casting Overwatch itself? Like, was it different? Did you have to level up in some ways or change your style much?
I definitely had to change things a bit. It's really hard. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. But the game moves so fast, and it's so vertical. There's the perspectives that you change your viewpoint from so rapidly in the game. And part of that is on the observing too. If you have really good observers, it makes a big difference in Overwatch. I think a bigger difference than any other game I've ever been in contact with. That a good observing team, which we do have at the Overwatch League, makes a huge difference, because when you've got observers that aren't quite on the ball, you're going to be getting a lot of random perspectives, and that makes it really difficult, not only for you to tell the story of what's going on as a caster, but also for you to deduce what's going on, because you're seeing like random snippets of what's happening instead of the big picture, right? So the nice thing that we have now, which we didn't have earlier, which made it pretty tough, is that up in the casting booth at the Overwatch League, we've got one monitor that's always a top-down view, and then the other monitor that's a program monitor. So I can be watching the program monitor and talking about the action, but I can also glance at the top-down view and get a sense of where everybody is in physical space.
If someone's going to do a flank or something,
right? Which helps, even though I can't, even though they might not be seeing that on the program screen on the stream, I know what's happening elsewhere, so I can use that to influence. That makes it a lot easier too. So not only do we have observers that know what hero to jump to from one to another, you don't go enemy tracer to enemy tracer or something like that. You go like to somebody generally on the other team, or you zoom out, then you go into somebody else. They make it more of a logical transition, switching viewpoints in the game, which makes it a lot easier. But you also have that top-down view too. But yeah, I think I've had to adjust my cast personally a lot, in that I've had to really distill down what's important to talk about, because in a team fight in League of Legends, you can cover most, if not all, of the action that happened in some way. But in Overwatch, there's kills constantly. There's all sorts of stuff happening, and you can't talk about all of it. You can't even talk about half of it. So you have to really figure out what's the most important thing to talk about and try to nail that. And that's where the difficulty is, I think, is in terms of getting the right thing every single team fight, which is obviously impossible, and something that you're always kind of working on. But yeah, it's a much harder game than anything else I've done, that's for sure.
One thing I've noticed about the setup of Overwatch League, even though you guys still have like duos and those cast gets put on the same games together, etc. It's not like you're swapping casting partners for the event. You guys get a little bit more of the experience of like what we used to have in CSGO, for example, where because we had a big open circuit, it meant you would constantly be meeting all the other casters and the other talent as well. Not just like I do this day and he does that day, and maybe we never meet each other and we both come in separately. You get to kind of be part of like a little community of people, a little crew of people. obviously you have all that talent at the Overwatch League. I mean, so many from so many different games all brought together. What's that aspect like? Because in Korea, in the early days, it was just the two of you. Then you had Papa. It's like gradually you were adding in like these nomads that would come over, but it took quite a while before you got the big kind of group going. So what's the atmosphere like within the Overwatch League in that sense?
Well, it's been really cool to get to work so closely with a lot of these other like really, really great casters from other games too. I mean, we've got Semler from Counter-Strike, obviously. We've got Mr. Rex from Call of Duty. Puckett did a lot of Halo and everything basically. And so we have all these people from all these different games coming together for Overwatch League, and it's been really kind of cool to compare styles and see these duos kind of develop a little bit and develop their own distinct personalities. And just kind of it's just fun to hang out with everybody and hear, swap esports stories from over the years. Because I think you've got like at least 100 years of esports experience with all that, with the crew at Overwatch League. So it's just a lot of esports experience, and it's a lot of different takes on things. And it's just really fun to interact with all those guys.
Right. What about now? This question sets this one up. Now you're even going to get something quite similar to what we in the Counter-Strike community get, which is you're going to go and have these homestands, which for people who aren't aware are kind of like, it's like a mixture almost between the feel of the open circuit. You go to different places, but right now, since they haven't fully done the geolocation where, you play half the games from your home stadium, it's more like, I would describe it almost like Formula One, like, you have stops that you go from stop to stop to stop, or a road show event, like obviously League did that a little bit in Europe at times. What do you think about this aspect? You've done a couple of them already, and obviously this is the plan for next year, is each team will have these dedicated things where you go to their home stadium, and it's kind of almost like a mini esports event just at that one stadium for those games. So what is it, the experience been like so far, and what do you anticipate moving into that world more permanently?
I think it'll be tough to be on the road that often. It'll be really, really challenging, but I think it'll be really fun because it does remind me a little bit of MLGs back in the day, or the IPLs and things like that, where you're kind of away from home doing this event with these teams. And I think one of the cool things about this kind of thing that you don't get as much with the big studio show that we do out of Burbank is that when you're away at these other events, you actually tend to, I feel, interact with players more often, because you're all in usually the same hotel. You're all always going to be at the same bars generally after the cast and things like that. Sure. Whereas in the studio, the teams will come to the arena, play their matches, and then leave. So unless you personally organize time to spend with the players and the team, you're not really going to get that, right? So that's one of the things I really like about these events, is just getting more time to just hang out with the players and get to know them a little bit better, because everyone's kind of away from home, at the same time. And it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. This is what we signed up for. Like the Overwatch League 2020 with the traveling model, that's what we were pitched initially. And then it was the kind of the thing where it's like, well, we need to give these teams time to set that stuff up, I guess. And so we had a couple of years in the studio, but now I finally feel like we're moving into what we signed up for in the first place. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. And I think it's way better. I'm so happy that we're doing the homestand model instead of doing the like home and away games, because I think it's way more exciting for the fans. You get a lot more value, I think, out of your ticket to seeing a whole bunch of teams compete there than just seeing like two teams, right? So I think it'll just be a much more fun, like carnival style atmosphere that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But I got to say, I don't like the name Homestand because it makes zero sense to me. I don't understand what Homestand means.
I don't really know either, but
I don't know. That's the only thing.
Someone in a marketing department came up with that. Like it must hit some certain focus group, I imagine.
I guess, I don't know, but I've never been able to figure out what Homestand means. I hope we change that next year, because I hate that.
Sure.
Name. It's
so, okay.
But the event is cool. The name, dumb.
Sure.
Event, awesome.
So you already alluded earlier when I was asking about the Korean events that the Overwatch League finals, like the actual grand final itself that was in the Barclays Center, and I'd myself been there for CSGO events, ESL1 New York's held there. You alluded to the idea this was like a special atmosphere at this stadium. So what was it like for the finals? Because obviously, it's the big finals of the first season of the league. It has to succeed in some sense. You have to put on a great show. Otherwise, sadly, the nature of the industry is people will consider it a flop. You had obviously some of the weirder elements with like DJ Khaled was involved somehow, you know. Still feels very surreal that even happened, actually, quite frankly. That was like a Chappelle Show skit or something.
It was so esports. That was the most esports moment of the whole thing, to have a musical artist on stage that the audience does not care about at all. Like that is pure esports right there. So I'm glad, you know, people complain about the Overwatch League being too mainstream and all that. No, that was esports right there.
What about the actual experience of the final then? What was it like in this sense, and what were your expectations going in?
I didn't know what to expect, honestly. I heard that so I knew the crowd was going to be full, but I didn't really know what it would be like in comparison to the Burbank studio, because at the Burbank studio, you know, the most hype matches have always been the LA. Obviously, we're in LA, so when the LA teams are playing at the Blizzard Arena, then you know the crowd is much more into it, right? There's a noticeable difference in hype levels of the crowd. You get that sometimes, like when there's fan favorites like Shanghai Dragons and like New York and stuff like that. But the LA teams are always way up there. So I kind of was like, all right, is this going to be like a big scale version of like an LA day? And it was like that to like the nth degree, you know, and it was two teams that weren't even from New York. And that was kind of a surprise too, because we thought naturally New York was going to be in the finals. So like, you know, that'd be cool. New York playing in their home, you know, arena and all that. But then Philly and London, who were at the very bottom of the playoff seeds, ended up being the two teams in the finals. So it was kind of a surprise matchups. We're like, all right, well, kind of hurt us. Are people not going to show up because New York isn't in the finals? But man, people showed up and it was insane. And I've been to a good amount of traditional sporting events. I'm a big football fan, so I have been to like the Green Bay Packers stadium in in Green Bay, Lambeau Field. And so in traditional sporting events, like everybody's wearing sports gear, everybody's like hanging off every play. You know, people are really hype, and like that was what I saw at the Barclays Center, where like, and that's the crazy thing about like the Blizzard Arena too, and just Overwatch and. So it's something I never really saw in League of Legends or StarCraft, where nearly everybody, like 90% plus of the fans in the arena, are wearing some sort of team gear. And it feels much more like the crowd from a traditional sporting event, in that people are really out to support their team and support their community, rather than just like, hey, I'm Cloud9 guy, hey, I'm FaZe guy, you know, that kind of thing. I hesitate to put traditional sports on a pedestal, because I don't think that's what we necessarily need to aspire to be. But I do think when you have an esport like Overwatch that has that geographic model, you need to capture that same element of a regional excitement about a team. And the finals really drove the point home to me personally that the league really is doing that, and people really will get behind their teams, and they're willing to travel as well. You know, it was Philly and London, right, in this finals, but everybody was wearing gear. It was so cool, and there was a lot of other gear with other teams too, of course, but the majority of it was Philly and London, which was surprising to see and really, really cool.
Aside from when Koreans happen to have the best team or the best players, now that you're casting a league which is obviously people from all over the world, I mean, there's people from all the different countries of Europe, like EQOs from Israel, there's all the North American players, and then there's the Koreans, the Chinese, like a global game, but all in one league. Unlike in League, it was obviously region locked and separated out, and okay, maybe you got some imports to like China or North America, but it wasn't as much like mixed together, basically. People kind of competed separately and then went to the big international tournament. Do you still feel any kind of like natural connection to the Korean players in that sense? Is there any difference for you? Do you have favorite players based on other reasons?
I don't really think, as far as favorite players goes, it has to do with whether they're Korean or not anymore. Maybe at one time it did, but not anymore. JDubs and Jaehong are still my favorites, and they happen to be Korean, but they also happen to be insane flex supports, which is my favorite role to watch. So, you know, those guys are absolutely my favorites right now. But I think it's one of those things where it's good for Korea to be involved in a league like this. I think on the player side of things, because I've always said that I do think Korean players sometimes practice too much. Like I do think it does produce incredible esports players, incredible gamers, but it does it at the detriment to their personal lives and their social development, and I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it to have that part of your life held back in exchange for a couple of years of being really, really good at a video game, and maybe, you could argue that's what professional sports stars are doing in other games as well. You have to be a little bit insane to be as good as the top players in any sport. But I do think that the practice regimen being a little bit easier here in probably when teams disperse again because of that mixture of Korean players and non-Korean players, I think is good for both parties, where I think it's good for the Korean players in that things are toned down a little bit from the intense practice facilities we had in Seoul, and these guys are actually getting to live their lives a little bit more. And I think it's good for the non-Korean players too, because they're being held a little bit more accountable. They do have to practice a little bit more than they did before. And I know there are non-Korean pros out there that practice like crazy and deserve all the credit for it. But I also know for a fact that in general, Korean pros have practiced harder than non-Korean pros. So I think what the Overwatch League does is it evens that out in the best way for both parties.
Okay. Right, I'm going to, for this question, right, it's going to require a little bit of creative thought, but I'm going to let you have the final word on this one, okay? So,
all right.
Has anyone in Overwatch yet had a moment as iconic as, like, the Faker versus Ryu 1v1 or the Xpeke back to, some of them really famous, like, League of Legends one? Has anyone had, like, a moment that sticks out for you like that, or some iconic call that you can tell us?
I mean, the fact that I have to even think about it tells me that nobody has. If there was one, I would immediately know it,
Sure.
So I don't think we've had that moment much, and there's no rush. League of Legends didn't have that moment for, 2 years in Korea, 4 years if you include the tournaments that went on outside of Korea for League of Legends. So you don't necessarily need to have that moment right away to validate the esport or anything like that. And I'm sure those moments will happen. To a certain extent, I think the meta that we've been in for most of the year, the 3-3 meta has made it very difficult for those moments to happen to begin with.
Sure.
So I think we've kind of lost 3/4 of a season worth of time for those moments to happen. From here on out, with the role lock, I think now we suddenly have a meta where individual players can really perform and excel in a way that they weren't able to earlier in the season. So we got a chance to have those moments again. I think there's been some moments that have been really close. The one that springs to mind is like the Prophet 5K in the finals last year.
Sure.
That was just a totally insane display of like technical skills. So there's certainly been moments that are like right up mind-blowing stuff. But as far as like a moment like the Xpeke backdoor, the Faker Ryu duel, I don't think we've had that yet in Overwatch. I think we will. But who knows how long it takes to get there. And I don't think we need that to validate the game as an esport. We shouldn't be saying, if we don't have those moments, then it's not a valid esport, right?
Right. Another thing I wanted to ask about in terms of casting, since you alluded to it there, is it must have been tricky casting the G.O.A.T.s meta, because for people who don't know, one of the reasons why I totally understand both positions, like I totally understand why someone like Monty is perverse enough to love that style of play, because to him it represents everything about like tactical, coordination, all the things but the problem is, to the most casual fan, to them it just looks like everyone's just shooting each other and running at each other, whereas like that, clearly that's not what's happening, but it's obviously, you must take a lot of skill to try and yourself know what's going on, how to communicate that. It's a little bit trickier than, for example, now with the role lock, if a guy's playing Widow, you commentate whether he gets the headshot, you got, it's a little bit more streamlined, right? So what were the challenges of G.O.A.T.s for you?
Well, I think the main challenge was honestly finding the excitement in, because all of the team comps look the same, the fights look the same. When one team would roll the other, they'd be pretty one-sided. Like they're just, and like I mentioned too, I think one of the things that any sport needs is the ability for an individual to stand out and be clearly better than the people on the other team, and be clearly better than the people on his team. And I don't think the G.O.A.T.s meta really allowed for that to happen. And it was, and even though I am play-by-play, I do personally like to analyze the game, and I like to understand the compositions, and I enjoy diving into that. And with that, it's like, all right, well, I kind of get G.O.A.T.s now, and what else is there, right? So now we have a meta where there's a lot more strategy, and you have the ability for individual players to stand out. So it's a lot easier that way. G.O.A.T.s was so weird, though, because G.O.A.T.s itself, the 3 tank, 3 support comp is a cool composition. It's a neat composition. it's cool that it's so alt dependent. It's cool that it requires such a high level of team coordination that you don't even really see it on the ladder. It's so disconnected from regular Overwatch play because of the level that it takes to play it well, that it makes it really cool. The problem is that it was the same composition for every map, every game. And I know even Monty was getting bored at the end, where it's like you can only take so much of the same thing over and over again. At the same time, that was a great meta to introduce people into Overwatch because it's so easy to understand. Because you can say, look at the ult economy. You know, this team has these ults. This team doesn't. This team has an advantage in the fight. You want to pair this ultimate with this ultimate. Look, see, we have a wide shot all the time, so it's easy to show you. So as far as the new viewers that we might have had, Disney XD or ABC or something like that, it was actually a very easy introductory meta to the game to teach people just like how the game works on a basic level. So it's weird that it kind of had like that benefit, but I think that benefit was definitely overruled by the blandness that it offered for everyone else. You know, and once you got that as a new person watching the game, you're like, is there anything else, right? So, you know, I'm really glad it's gone. It was a weird time for Overwatch. There were positives. There were a lot more negatives than positives, but it will definitely be an era that will not soon be forgotten. That's for sure.
As it stands right now, there is no, this is purely a hypothetical question. I'm not speculating anywhere. If we imagine one day somewhere down the line, maybe it's in 10 years, 5 years, I don't know how long, let's say a game gets released. It could be Warcraft 4. It could be StarCraft 3. One of the games that's, you know, the original genre you came up in. Again, Blizzard title. You work for Blizzard at the moment. Would you like at some point in your career to kind of come full circle and come back to a big RTS game if it was big?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, 100 times yes. I love RTS. It is probably my favorite genre to cast. Not to play, but to cast. So I would love to get a chance to cast another RTS again. And it's just a genre that's not very big right now. But you know, if we do get a Warcraft 4 or a StarCraft 3 someday, you better believe I'm going to be trying to jump back in there and casting that. I might not, you know, it'll probably have to be a part-time thing, but you know, it's still something I'm going to do. And when Warcraft 3, I'm really actually very excited about Warcraft 3 Reforged coming out because I never played Warcraft 3. It was during, weirdly enough, I played Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 and StarCraft and Brood War a ton. But Warcraft 3 came out right at a point where I was insanely busy in college and I was too responsible and I didn't take time to play Warcraft 3 like I should have. I was a good student, but I was a bad gamer.
Yes,
and so I didn't play Warcraft 3. I know, right? My bad. But then, and then by the time my classes and stuff were winding down, that was when World of Warcraft came out. And I started playing World of Warcraft, and then you're never going to have time for Warcraft 3. So I actually totally missed the boat on Warcraft 3 completely. So I'm really excited about Reforged coming out because I want to actually play this game. And I know I can go back and play the original, but I'm going to wait for the HD remake, you know, because I'm kind of petty that way. But, you know, when that comes out, I'm really getting into the competitive side of the game and learning more about that. Weirdly enough, I did cast Warcraft 3 at WCG a couple times. I casted some really amazing games of Warcraft 3, actually, like so amazing to the extent that I kind of feel bad that it was me casting them because I didn't do them justice. But it was such a cool game to watch and to cast. I love the blend of RTS with like the MOBA elements, right? And which is weird to call them MOBA elements because those were just RTS elements that influenced MOBAs to be a thing.
Exactly.
So it's weird. It's weird to say it that way, but that's how you say it so people get it in the current like gaming sphere. But it seems like it's always seemed like such a cool. Totally missed the boat. So I'm definitely going to get into that when Reforged comes out, and absolutely I'm going to get into, you know, any future Blizzard RTS if/when they make them. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I have no idea, but it'd be awesome.
Right, a lot of people I know who work as talent in any esports game, a lot of them, their whole story goes like this. They just loved that game, they locked into a job doing something in that game, and unfortunately for a lot of them, there isn't a world outside the game for them at least. Like, they think to themselves, like, either when my jobs in the industry, dry up, I'll just retire, or if I lose interest in this game, I'll retire. And I'm amazed how many of them I've even told, like especially the ones, for example, who have like an amazing voice, or they're very funny, or they pick up games quick. I've told so many of them, at least keep your eye out if there's another esports game maybe you could transition to. Maybe there's something else that would like maybe reignite the spark if it goes out in one game. But I notice a lot of people, whether it's like, ego, maybe they don't want to go and become bad and start at, ground zero in a new game, or become nobody in a new game and not have the same status and be assured the same jobs. A lot of people are kind of very resistant to that idea. And I've noticed they stay kind of siloed away in their little games. And aside from like the Overwatch League's a good example where you've been able to draw all these other game talents, a lot of people don't necessarily think of that. As someone who's kind of been from game to game to game, and we're discussing here the possibility maybe you'll do different games in the future. Is there a secret to this mindset where you don't kind of get too worried about one game, or how you know when it's time to move on from a game? Can you give us any insight into that?
I think it really just comes down to loving esports, and just loving what esports is, which at its core, esports is literally just people fighting each other in a video game tournament. And it's if you love video games and you love competition in video games, I think it's really easy to love different games too. And I've never been the type of person to be locked into one game or one genre at the time. I'm always playing different games at the same time. Even now, I play a lot of Overwatch, but I also play a lot of other different stuff too. I play a lot of I'm playing a ton of auto chess across like different genres right now, or different versions of auto chess. Because that genre is just tons of fun to me right now. But like, I think that's part of it is just I've always just loved competition in games, no matter what kind of games they are, and that even extends outside of video games to board games as well. I'm really into Warhammer now. It's like tabletop miniature gaming. It's not even a video game; it's just another game people compete in, and I just really enjoy that. So for me, it's been that enjoyment that's made it pretty easy to move from game to game, and also just the fact that like I just really love the craft of learning a new game and learning how to cast it and learning the intricacies of it. It's like a new game is kind of like this like gift that you get to unwrap, and you get to like learn about all the characters and the lore and the strategy and all that kind of stuff. So it never feels like a chore to me. It never feels like, oh no, what am I going to do? I guess I have to do this game now to survive. It's always been like, this game has been fun, and I'm always going to enjoy my time with it, but now it's time to move on to something new, and I can't wait to like explore it and see everything that's in there.
If someone is following this part of the interview, but they don't follow Overwatch, like it's not a game they've explored, or maybe they gave it one chance 3 years ago, and for whatever reason they went back to their original game, could be League, could be StarCraft. I'll ask for 2 questions. One, tell them a player that they could watch that, like, this guy's like worth the price of admission. It's like, this guy's a guaranteed entertainment value. If you watch this guy, he's going to be super skilled, but he'll leap off the screen. And then give me another guy for like personality to follow, like a player who has something about their personality that would be very interesting. Give us those 2 recommendations.
I would say watch Prophet on the London Spitfire for like insane mechanical play. The guy is like so good on Hanzo, really anything he touches, but he's so much fun to watch right now. He's aggressive. He likes to take risks, but he usually pays those risks off by just like killing 3 people at the same time. So it's great. He's so much fun to watch. So he's an easy player to recommend to people because pretty much every map he's in, he's a superstar. And then as far as personality goes, I would take a look at probably Bumper on the Vancouver Titans. The guy is definitely a character. I mean, the thing is, I think in Overwatch League right now we've got a lot of characters. If you look at him, you look at Baby Bay on Atlanta Reign, get like Super on San Francisco Shock. Like, these are players with big personalities that aren't afraid to trash talk, and then they're also players that can like back it up in game too, and kind of like show off their style with some tactical crouching when the opportunity arises. Like
Indeed.
That. So
yes.
Yeah, so we've got some good personalities to watch right now, and I think there's a lot to like if you haven't seen Overwatch, and it's such a good time to start watching again too, because you've got a chance to actually see players pop off individually that you didn't really have earlier in the year. So it's better than it's been all 2019 right now.
At the end of this interview, do you have like a final message or someone you want to thank or shout out?
Oh man, I mean, after doing this for 9 years so far, and professionally for 8, there's just been so many people that have been so great over the years, and you know, there are too many to shout out that I can even, you know, probably can't even remember all of them. But like, obviously, like number one is Monty, you know, just for being such like an amazing casting partner for all these years, being like a brother to me, you know, outside of the cast and all that. Just a fantastic guy to work with. Someone's always been fun to argue with, you know, play card games with and things like that, board games as well, and just has always had my back in a business sense too. It's been a fun partnership for these last 7 years now as well. So obviously, like, number one, Monty, but then like all the other people like at OGN, at GOAT TV, that gave me the opportunities to, you know, come and prove myself in esports, you know, for Blizzard, for picking me and Monty up, you know, to do the Overwatch League and kind of be some of the first faces and the first ambassadors for this game to esports, you know, and I hope we've done a good job, and I hope we continue to do a good job of that. And of course, you know, all the fans, this is starting to sound kind of cliche, but all the fans for watching, we really do appreciate you. You know, and obviously if you weren't watching, then we wouldn't have jobs. So it's kind of nice that you feed us as well. So thanks for feeding us in the Overwatch League. Just please stop feeding in my ranked games. That's all I ask in return. But aside from that, yeah, I mean, thanks for doing this interview. It's been a ton of fun. I always enjoy our interviews, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
So you again in 5 years. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. 5 years could be a whole new esports world.
Exactly.
That's how it is.
Exactly. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, the Puyallup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.